And it is my honor to be able to introduce BJay Pak, who, in my opinion, exemplifies the type of leadership that we need in our nation right now. Now, let me just step back for a minute, because in 2002, there was a young associate at Alston & Bird here in Atlanta by the name of Chris Carr. He left the firm. And who took Chris Carr's office but one? BJay Pak. And I have said many times before, the intelligence factor in that office went up dramatically when that happened. Now, shortly afterwards, BJay left that lucrative career at working at Alston & Bird in Atlanta to work in public service, and he has never stopped. He made history as the second Asian American elected to the Georgia General Assembly, and he made history again when he was appointed to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia. Now, you can tell that BJay was destined for public service from a very early age. If you will look at this beautiful glamour shot of BJay that I understand was taken his senior year, I think it's about to pop up. Here he is. Not only is BJay intelligent, he is debonair as well. So you knew that he was destined for greatness. But I'm thrilled. I'm honored to introduce my friend BJay Pak. So again, on behalf of GAPABA and NAPABA, welcome to this conversation on the importance of public service during these challenging times. And I now turn it over to my colleague, Rodney.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. BJay, thank you very much for participating this afternoon. We know it's a very busy time for you, so we appreciate your time. We hope you had a wonderful Father's Day. And did you have a volleyball game yesterday? For those who don't know, BJay coaches his daughter's beach volleyball team, and along with his many other accomplishments, this must be one of his singular achievements. So how did the game go yesterday?
Well, thank you, Ronnie. Yes, my oldest daughter, who's 13, plays junior beach volleyball. And she participated in a tournament yesterday, and that's why I have a little bit of a suntan. She did fairly well with her partner. They've been pretty consistent, and they were lucky enough to come in third place out of their 14 and under tournament. But it wasn't because of me, it's because of their hard work.
Excellent. Well, BJay, I'd like to start with your origin story, if I may. You and your family immigrated from South Korea to Apopka, Florida, when you were 9 years old. Can you talk to us a little bit about that experience? And there you are as a debonair-looking child with good hair. And can you talk about your immigrant story and how being a first-generation immigrant shaped you personally, your ambition, your drive, and your work ethic, if you can, or if it has?
Sure. I was in Korea. I was actually very, very shy, and people don't know that. You probably don't think that I was shy, but I was very shy. But I was studious when I was younger. There was a lot of thought about various targets potentially of terrorism, and Atlanta always been on a market for a target as a potential site, particularly because of CNN and also the CDC that's based here in Atlanta. So there's always this fear that our infrastructures may not be as safe as we want it to be. So when the third plane, which eventually ended up in the field in Pennsylvania, was still missing, there was a little bit of widespread panic. And so we were going down, and you couldn't take the elevator, and so I had to take the flights of stairs. And I think a lot of you may know there's an attorney by the name of Liz Price, who's still at Alston & Bird. And Liz and I, we were on the same floor, and I remember going down 84 flights of stairs, and there was a woman that had hard time breathing. I think she had a medical condition. I remember us helping her down, and then when we got to the ground level, and the paramedics being called there, and we all went home. And I remember the images of the plane crashing into the World Trade Center building being replayed again and again, and then you get kind of traumatized by the suddenness of this, and no one really could foresee that. And as an immigrant, I don't know about you, but I've always had this view that America was an invincible country, is the richest, it's the strongest, and that you always feel free and secure in our nations and our border. And 9/11 just completely shattered that perception for me. And I always felt like, and I realized that our country needed our help. I had to do my part to at least try to make it safe. It's always been my biggest regret in my career that I didn't join the military. I tried 3 times, and that's another side story why I didn't end up in the military. But at that time, when I came back to work after a few days of the office closure, and the sympathies that was pouring in, even though I personally did not have any family members or close friends who died in that tragedy, it really, hit home for me in terms of I internalized kind of what was going on. And I imagine a lot of our Black colleagues and friends who view kind of what's been happening with George Floyd, it was something similar in that, even though George Floyd was not someone they might be related to, that trauma had a significant impact on the way they do and they perceive, and it drives them to action or try to do something different. And for 9/11, that wake up moment was that for me, and I felt like I needed to try to do something. And it was kind of lucky. Shortly after that event occurred, a good friend of mine who used to be an assistant U.S. attorney at the time, Kathy O'Neill, and her husband, David Namias, who's now on the Georgia Supreme Court, had reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in, applying to become an assistant U.S. attorney. And so I said, wow, yeah, that'd be great if I could, do some public service. I'd be happy to do that. A lot of my friends thought I was crazy. I made it to a white shoe law firm. I was making a lot of money. Why would you ever go to public service? But it was not I didn't have any hesitation over that. I said, this is something that's calling to me that I should really try to do. As a result, I applied. I didn't get in the first time. I was rejected with a nice letter saying that we'll let you know. And what happened was the new U.S. attorney who got in there after the elections was Judge Bill Duffy, who was U.S. attorney at the time, and took a shot on me, and he felt like that I had some potential. So I happened to be the least experienced AUSA he hired at the time, which was I was barely out 4 years from passage of the bar. And so he gave me that chance, and I was one of the first hired as an AUSA in our state, and I never looked back ever since. And it's such a great honor to be an assistant U.S. attorney. You get to stand up in court and say that I represent the United States, and being an Asian American, that's a tremendous honor, and also as an immigrant, it has a profound impact on me. I know we have very distinguished guests that I know went through the same thing. I know Justin Anon, who I call a dear friend, who kind of blazed his own path that way. And I also know that 9/11 had a similar effect on him that turned to life public service. So that's how I ended up in public service. And when I left the U.S. Attorney's Office after 6 years, I promised myself that I would continue to serve public somehow. It doesn't necessarily mean being government or in this role, but I always try to make it a point to offer myself for public service. And as a result, when I left and I was in private practice, public service came calling again. Those of you who may know that I was a state representative, and a lot of my friends encouraged me to run. I think we're going to get there, Rodney.
We'll get to that shortly. But
okay.
And Timothy is going to ask you some questions about that. But I just have one more question before I hand it over to Timothy to talk about your elected office. And
sure.
That has to do with Asian Americans in public service. As you might be aware, Justice Goodwin Liu of the California Supreme Court did a study as to why there has been a steady decline of Asian Americans applying to law school. And one of the reasons is apparently because of financial considerations. And especially when I don't know if Chris is still on, but public service is not the most lucrative
Right.
area of law. So I just want to sort of get your thoughts on Asian Americans, especially in public service, and especially in lieu of the fact that there's a decline in Asian Americans applying to law school and going into public service, what that means for the Asian American community in the public policy space, and in terms of following your footsteps. And then after you're done answering, I'll hand it over to Timothy to talk about your political career.
Sure, it's disappointing that we have lower number of Asian Americans applying to law school, because I think law school gives a tremendous education and a way for us to shape public policy and careers in that field. I think that one of the biggest challenges that younger lawyers are facing, now that I didn't face as much, is the cost of law school and graduate education has skyrocketed. And as a result, when people take out student loans, although their hearts may be in public service, that they can't afford it. I know the economists phrase the term Henry, high earner, not yet rich, or not rich yet. I think a lot of folks are in that space, because I know in talking to many Asian Americans, lawyers or non-lawyers, they want to do it, but they just financially can't make it happen at this time. And my advice to them is this: I mean, if your passion is in public service, we will find a way. We should try to find a way to do that. But you have to have that practical consideration, particularly if you want a family. You want to make sure that you may have some elderly parents that you have to take care of. I understand all that. But we have to have a constant stream and encouragement of Asian Americans offering them for public service, because having a seat at the table makes real difference in the actual policy that comes out. A small example of if you're an Asian American prosecutor, and this sounds very cliché, but it's true, you would understand a defendant who comes from your background better than someone else. This is why diversity is so important in decision making and in places of influence, because if you don't provide that perspective to decision makers, or you yourself is a decision maker, you lack that perspective, and that could have a not optimal impact on Asian American communities or any communities of color. So I encourage everyone to try to pay off those student loans if you have them, and then offer yourself public service. And what I found is that if you do it right, that there's always a way to go back to private sector or some other ways that you could offer yourself to have a little better financial holding. But the experience that you gain, and perception and perspective that you gain from public service and from the public space could be very, very valuable to a lot of clients, and not to mention to your community. So I would encourage, while I understand the financial hardships, to keep trying and work very hard to get yourself to that point, because we need you. We need good people making good decisions.
Thank you, BJay, and thank you, Rodney. For those who don't know me, my name is Timothy Wang. I'm an attorney in-house at Delta Airlines, and I'm the president-elect of GAPABA. We are so thrilled to have all of the folks here online with us, and I am personally thrilled to have this opportunity to spend a few minutes talking with U.S. Attorney BJay Pak. BJay, so Rodney and I were a little bit apprehensive about taking a moderator role with someone, of your background and experience and fame, but you actually make it really easy. I don't know if you saw our script, but you're like segueing for us. So thank you for doing that. But I did want to talk a little more about your career as a state legislator. And you talked about the need and importance of that. The piece I wanted to focus a little bit more on are the nuts and bolts of it, because I think, as with many things, not having a pipeline, not having mentors, not having family in public service, in elected office, I think is an impediment for a lot of people. I will speak for myself. The thought has crossed my mind from time to time. I grew up in Alabama and ended up working there in economic development out of college, and had a couple of opportunities come my way. And I'll be honest, I was not as brave as you. The financial aspects of it is one thing. I had student loans at the time, but I looked around and thought, I don't even know where to start. Like, how do I find a campaign manager? How do I fundraise? Do I go door to door? So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how you got involved, how you staged your campaign, and what it was actually like when you were petting dogs and kissing babies and knocking on doors.
Yeah, Timothy, that a lot of people think about running for office and would like to do it, but not many people actually put their name on the ballot. And I think the impediment is not so much that they don't have the will to do it; it's just the know-how, and that's just basically it. There's lots of ways to persuade yourself not to run. There's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't do it. So people talk themselves out of running all the time, and I think about that. But I mean, if there's anything that people could look at my career and say is, hey, you know what? If he did it, come on. I mean, how hard could it be, right? First thing, as lawyers, I'll tell you, you need to accept the fact that you do not know everything, okay? In the political world and running campaigns, you have to accept the fact that you need to take advice from people who are experts in that field. So you can start by talking to someone who's run for office before to get recommendations on, how do you select a campaign manager or whatnot, and how do you raise money and those kind of nuts and bolts of campaigning. And I think that there's a lot more programs now to kind of develop those type of skills. I personally went through a leadership program that I was in public policy leadership program, where they actually had that aspect of kind of learning the nuts and bolts. Not to mention, it gives you this network of politicos that allows you to use them as a resource to call them up and say, how do I do this? So when I first decided to run for office, I really didn't know. I was interested in politics, and I have friends that are in politics, but I never considered myself like a candidate for office. So I called up one of my friends who I met through the leadership program and said, hey, I'm thinking about running. What do you think? And what advice can you give me? And he gave me some good advice. The first advice is, campaigning is really about numbers, right? It's about getting more votes. So it's not, then you have to design your program around that. So you have to think about, well, listen, where am I going to get my votes from? Where are my sources of strength? And, how do I get there? And how much time do I have? And so I hired a campaign consultant to kind of help me lay out a program, but they don't give you like a book. It's not like a presidential race where they have this highly sophisticated program. But what they could tell you is basically how many votes you need to get to win. They give you a historical perspective of that. So they gave me a target. So you need to go get this number of votes to win your primary, and this number of votes to win the general election. So he said, look, compared to your opponents, you've lived in the district a lot less. It's predominantly white, at the time. You need to go get the votes. And so I said, well, what do you want me to do? I said, well, you need to go door to door. And every time you go door to door, here's a voter list. You go introduce yourself, tell them what you're about, and ask for that vote. And then ask for the yard sign. And that you have to do that again and again. And matter of fact, I did that every single day during my campaign. And it's the most humbling experience when you run for office. Right now, you're maybe in a bubble that everybody thinks you're great because you're very smart, you have a good paying job, and you have a lot of power. But when you go door to door, none of that matters because they need to vote for you. They need to like you. You need to be able to connect with people who are different from you. If you didn't notice, there aren't many Asian American voters in my district at the time. Just by looking at Korean surnames, I counted maybe 50 at the time. And so I went door to door, and I had lots of folks who never had an Asian American candidate running for office at the time. But I'll quickly learn how to connect with a lot of folks because they all care about the same issues. And for me at the time, it was making sure that crime rate is down and make sure our school system provides opportunities for their kids. And so it was a good learning experience. As you go through it, you learn more and more about the community and about people in general and how to relate to them. And I realized that, even when I network, I tend to go towards people that make me feel comfortable, like people I know, or people who look like me, or people who have similar background. And politics and when you're campaigning forces you out of that. You need to go get the vote, introduce yourself, and all that shyness. And how as Asian Americans, we have this cultural programming of just working hard and not speaking out for what you want. I had to get over that very, very quickly. And so I did. I started gaining traction, and a lot of people in the community, my neighbors started supporting me. More and more, I start seeing yard signs here that my name, that name, and I have people calling from all over the place saying, I was driving through the Gwinnett County and saw your yard sign. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're running for office. My college fraternity brother, I didn't even know he lived in Georgia, called me up and said, I saw your yard sign. So it's kind of crazy. And I remember a lot of my GAPABA friends helped me financially in my campaign, and they also helped me with my campaign. And I will never forget the first time on the election night, on the primary election night, where we were all sitting around this Italian restaurant called Bambinelli's, and the first results came in, and they showed that I was up, and the room just erupted because you don't really know until the actual, the votes are counted. And so once I won the primary and the runoff, it was a little bit easier. I became a pro at kind of getting my talking points very efficiently, and remember to take rejection, diplomatically, because guess what? Not everybody's going to vote for you. And not only that, people slam their door in your face. But you have to understand that it's not personal, right? It's politics, and then you have to grow a thick skin. And campaigning actually was the easy part, Tim. Actually, governing is even harder, and I'm sure you're going to ask me some questions about that. But for those of you who are scared not to offer yourself a public service, if it's really, truly in your passion to do that, and you want to run for office, call me. I'd be happy to talk to you and tell you everything that I made mistakes on, and things that I could pass on the best I can. But I'm happy to note that there's growing number of Asian American elected officials in the state of Georgia. And I'm happy to see that trend will continue. At the same time, regardless of party, there's just not enough of Asian Americans who can provide that perspective, no matter where we are. So, we'll try to help each other, be a resource each other, and then put partisan differences aside. That's the only way we could get a consensus, make sure that our Asian American community voices are heard.
Yeah, thank you so much for describing the process, and also for offering yourself so generously to help. I think one of the things we're going to do follow up to this conversation is send out some resources, both on what people can do in the community to help with the recent events and the social injustice and racial injustice that we're all observing and experiencing, but also some resources that we've been able to identify to help build a pipeline for Asian American politicians and to help get people in public office. So we will be circulating that, but thank you for offering your personal help. That's terrific. So yeah, you segued again perfectly to my question about governing. So what was it like when you won, right? Was it a little bit like the dog catching the car? Were you wondering what day one was going to be like, and what was it like? And once you were in office, can you talk a little bit about the balance of, because I think we all, when we think about office, we do think about policy. We think about making an impact and an influence. That's why you did it. You wanna shape the lives of people in your district for the better. But I have to imagine you also get endless numbers of calls and emails about potholes. I know that's not part of the state's jurisdiction, but I'm sure you got it, right? And people saying, look, my cat ran up a tree. What do I do about that? I just imagine you must get it all. But can you talk a little bit about what you experienced early on and how you were able to find the right balance between the day-to-day and what you really ran for office to do?
Sure. You know, I remember the first week I went down to the Capitol and looked at my office and then walked into the House chamber. And those of you who have not been to the Georgia House chamber, it's actually a very, very grand building where those chairs that you may be seeing right there, they're cherry oak, and they go back to in the 1800s when the capital of Georgia was based in Savannah, and those are original chairs. And then there's this huge chandelier on top of the Capitol building, and I remember looking at it. And then a senior member of the chamber came up to me, tapped me on the shoulder, and said, "BJ, you're probably saying to yourself, how the hell did you get here, right?" I was like, yeah, I'm kind of taking it all in. He goes, "You may say that in your first term, but come back the next term, and you're going to be saying, how the hell did they get here?" Because the grandiosity will wear off very quickly. But interestingly enough, there's a lot of decorum and there's a lot of rules. Tim, just getting to your point about policy and balancing those things. There are things that when you get elected, you run on ideas and principle, and you get their votes. When you get there, politics is the ultimate team sport. So I mean, it's all about relationship and trying to get them to agree or see it your way, right? So first thing you have to do is you have to kind of know everybody across the aisle and everyone, and also the staffers that actually make things happen, right? And learning kind of the decorum and the unofficial rules of like, okay, so am I supposed to do that? Can I do this? Can I do that? They don't tell you that. There's no book, okay? Once you get elected, there's a orientation over at the Carl Vinson Institute at University of Georgia for newly elected legislators. The first thing they throw at you is this budget, right? And that is not something easy kind of understand. At the same time, there's plenty of folks who are willing to lend a hand, to mentor you and kind of work with you to make sure that you become a productive member of the General Assembly. Now, that being said, there's a lot of advocacy going on in the Capitol. So there are various groups that want to shape policy, and there are lots of lobbyists. And in of itself, lobbying is not a dirty word. Actually, for part-time legislators, it's a necessity because they do the work, and also they educate you on an area that you may not be very familiar with. I mean, you obviously have to be careful about kind of your closeness and all that, but lobbyists could be a citizen that are coming in and they're really caring about an issue, and then or an organization, someone that they represent an organization or a company like Delta Airlines, to educate us on the policy making. The toughest part, I think, Timothy, is to kind of learn everybody and what makes them tick in terms of what perspective they bring. Because you really can't pass law. People think it's easy just filing bills, and you're right. A lot of people just file bills, but if you really think about it, not many bills get passed. It goes all the way through. It goes from one chamber to the other chamber to the governor's desk, and the governor signs off on it. And in concept, in Schoolhouse Rock, that seems very easy, but in practice, it's very, very difficult. And so you have to do a lot of work and preparation. And being a lawyer gives you that analytical mind. And to anticipate kind of potential roadblocks. And so learning that process, learning how to legislate, it's like getting a master's degree pretty much on everything from policy to actually psychology on how people work. And all along, you also have to balance kind of the politics of it. Remember, you can't vote for that bill if you're not reelected. And a lot of people are very, cynical in that view, but it's tough being a legislator. And I understand the policymakers' challenges because sometimes the general public may not know all the details of a particular bill. And we have, because of social media and like aggregating systems, for example, someone could start a petition on change.org on a bill, and next thing you know, you have 2,000 emails in like three minutes. That type of thing happens. So a lot of times you don't have the resources to get your message out. And this might be a little commentary in a larger context of what's going on in politics today, is that there's so much noise out there. It's very hard to communicate what the truth is. And as a result, people kind of give up and have this view of apathy or throwing your hands up and said, this system's broken. I don't care anymore. And that's a really dangerous thing, Timothy. And having been a legislator and policymaker on the inside, and if you don't have good men and women offering themselves for public service, who actually do it for the right reasons, then you have the people who have different agendas taking over those positions, which make the situation worse. It's supposed to be an adversarial process politically, but it's supposed to be a system that drives compromise. And along the way, even during the time that I served, and it's worse now at all levels, I think the word compromise has become a dirty word, and no one wants to do it. And we could go on and on about why we think that that's the case. But I just want to bring it back to say, when you want good policy, you have to elect good people. And to do that, you have to have good people offering themselves for as candidates. You have to educate yourself on an issue, not just on your side or what a service or a group tells you that we should do, but you really study the issues on both sides to understand. And that'll help you be much more effective as someone who lobbies for a change in law or an organization to make sure that their interests are protected. And so don't give up. There are good people out there, and we want good people to offer themselves to do it.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that absolutely makes sense, and that's part of why we're going to make it, make it part of the follow-up after this call, is to give people an opportunity, give them some resources, and maybe they will reach out to you. A lot that you've shared that's so valuable that we need to unpack, but the one piece that I'm going to spend a lot of time unpacking is that it's not exactly like Schoolhouse Rock, because I thought it was. So got a lot to work through. All right, so I'm going to hand it back over to Rodney, who's going to talk a little bit about your current role and your appointment.
Thank you, Timothy. BJay, can you tell us how your appointment to be the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia came about? And while doing so, can you, we've learned a lot about the appointment process recently, over the past weekend, in fact, because of what has happened to Jeffrey Berman in the Southern District of New York, that judges apparently perform a nominating portion of the appointment process or the appointment itself, and the president's ability to terminate a U.S. attorney because you all work for at his pleasure. So can you sort of talk about how you became the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, the appointment process, and who you work for and how you can get fired?
Sure. Well, you know something I don't.
I do not.
Every administration does this differently, but there's a similar theme. One thing is that by tradition, for U.S. attorneys and also for U.S. district court judges that are contained within a state, the Senate Judiciary Committee and the president generally defers some of those nominations and decisions to the senator of the party that's the same party of the president. So in my case, we have a Republican president and 2 U.S. senators, so it was relatively easy. So the senators created a selection committee for federal appointments. Those of you who may be interested in how this works, it's a combination of who you know, competency, and also timing, right? It's all 3 of those things. I was very fortunate, and I had several friends who were in politics that either worked on the transition team or became pretty high up level in the White House. And so, and I had relationships with people who were advising the both senators, including Attorney General Chris Carr, who used to be Senator Isaacson's chief of staff. So as a result, when the nomination process began, the senators formed a committee of 6 lawyers around the state, and they put an application and solicitation for application on the State Bar of Georgia's website. But at the same time, informally, I did get calls from my friends who were working on the transition and also from locally here who are Republican parties asking me if I was interested in applying. And so I went through the interview process, and the selection committee takes the resumes and they select a few. I don't know how many people they interviewed out of the resumes. I think they interviewed maybe 20 for my spot. And then they interview you on various things. And then once they they chosen a short list, they send that list up to DC. And the second round interview involves someone from the White House for kind of the political check, I guess, and then the Department of Justice, who has much influence on U.S. Attorney selection, partly because we are part of the Department of Justice and we have to take guidance from the Attorney General, who's the head of the department. That being said, I went up, I interviewed the second round. There was 3 of us who went up. One other person who was very prominent in Georgia. But you know, out of those 3, they make a recommendation to the president who he should nominate. But none of this gets announced. And then they ask you to come back for an interview. And generally it was the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General that interview you individually. So I went back up on a Saturday. I was sitting in a large conference room of the Attorney General on the 5th floor of the Department of Justice. And then at the time, Attorney General Jeff Sessions was there without a tie. It was the first time I ever seen him without a tie. And then Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein also participated in the interview, and we interviewed, and I obviously did pretty well. And then they gave their blessing on my nomination, and then I had to fill out all the questionnaires for the Senate Judiciary Committee, and then they don't tell you what happens, because then once the official nomination goes over, then you're at kind of the mercy of the Senate, right? Whenever they get around to it, and the Senate, they refer it to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it's like, Lord knows what's going to happen. I was very fortunate because I came in the earlier part of the administration, and they were filling executive positions. And so I was nominated at the end of July 27th, I believe, of 2017. And then they had an August recess, so the summer recess that everybody takes. And then they came back, and I was confirmed in end of September. And I took my oath on October 10th. So if you think about it, I literally, from nomination to confirmation, if you remove the August recess, it was approximately 30 somewhat days. So it was record speed. And matter of fact, they didn't even tell me when my Senate hearing was or vote was, because it's very non-controversial when you talk about U.S. attorneys. I didn't have to testify, thank goodness, but there was some controversy over my former colleague, Jessie Liu, who's speaking to NAPABA soon. She had an interview with the president, and Senator Feinstein, the ranking member, wanted some additional questions asked. So we had to fill out some additional questions about our contact with the White House and things like that. And so my 2 senators submitted their blue slip, which is their consent for the Senate Judiciary Committee to have a hearing. So I went through. Now, to get back to kind of Jeffrey Berman, and as you know, the 2 New York senators are Democratic. They have obviously much more power in stopping a nomination. Jeffrey Berman was going to be nominated as the president's choice, but Senator Schumer and Senator Gillibrand did not return in their blue slip, so there was never a Senate confirmation hearing for Jeff. And the same is true for my colleague Rich Donahue in the EDNY. And so what happened then is the Attorney General would go ahead, pursuant to the Vacancy Reform Act of, I think it's 1970, that you go ahead and select an interim U.S. attorney. And that's what they did. Attorney General Sessions appointed Jeff Berman as the interim acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. And if there is not a presidentially nominated, Senate confirmed U.S. attorney within 120 days of that appointment, the law currently states that the district judges of that district gets to appoint the interim until that person who's presidentially nominated, Senate confirmed, comes through. Now, of course, you can see there's an issue here when judges appoint prosecutors. There's some separation of powers concerns regarding this, but that law was never never challenged. And those of you who are a little bit older, like me as a lawyer, recall in 2005 there was a scandal over firing of certain selected U.S. attorneys and appointing U.S. attorneys in their stead. And the Senate at the time thought it was very concerning that this is bypassing the advice and consent role that the Senate plays on all presidential high-ranking officials. And as a result, they amended the Vacancy Reform Act to add this judicial appointment process after 6 months. Now, in Jeff Berman's case, if you've probably seen that he said that the judges have appointed him, that may be true, but the case law that we've seen that I'm aware of always makes clear that any executive branch member, unless they're an independent agency, and that is subject to kind of Senate approval for that oversight, and U.S. attorneys are not, are subject to termination because we serve at the pleasure of the president. So there was no doubt that the president could fire the U.S. attorney regardless of who appointed them. Jeff is a good guy. I know him. He's a dedicated public servant. He comes from a history of public service. I think his dad was also a high-ranking executive level person, and I wish him well.
Well, now that you are the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, we're living through some very challenging times. You mentioned earlier, I believe, that your dad was in law enforcement, and obviously you are a prosecutor, and we've seen protests in Atlanta over the death of Rayshard Brooks, for example. And there is, I was going to say there appears to be, but there is, I think it's fair to say, a break in the trust between some citizens and law enforcement officers and the justice system in general. And as a prosecutor, as a public servant, as someone who has dedicated his life to public service, I'm sure that you're concerned about this break in trust. And so I wanted to get your perspective on that and specifically talk about how your office can work to rebuild that trust between the community and not just law enforcement, but the criminal justice actors like yourself. And what specifically is your office doing? And if you can talk about the Project Safe Neighborhood initiative that the Justice Department has, and how your office is implementing that mission.
Sure. Just to let everybody know, the Department of Justice actually reviews any excessive force case that's referred to it. I know in the Rayshard Brooks case that as a normal course, when there's a officer involved shooting that results in someone dying, my office reviews all those cases. In this case, the GBI does a fantastic job investigating. Once they conclude it, they turn the report over to us. And we review it, and if we think that with additional work that's required, we ask a federal law enforcement agency, particularly the FBI, to conduct additional investigations because there's a potential civil rights violation in that case. And we intend to do that in this case as well. I like to wait for the complete investigative file to make any charging decision, because the last thing you want is to jump the gun and unfortunately make a conclusion that's based on an incomplete investigation. So we have somewhat of an indirect oversight over police, particularly for excessive use of force. We prosecuted many law enforcement officers for abuse of power or violating the law. Matter of fact, my district holds a record on the number of law enforcement officers, particularly in the corrections space, who violated their oath, prosecuting them in the last 3 years than any other district. In addition, we prosecuted an APD officer who beat a customer who thought that he stole a tomato, which he didn't, and broke his leg. And under tough facts, we got a conviction, and that person received a significant sentence. See, the one thing, of course, in these type of cases is just like what you said, Rodney. There's a break in the trust between the public and the police, and it becomes a very difficult situation. being the federal government is somewhat removed from that, although we do work with local law enforcement very closely and the community very closely, we could be the neutral arbiter, and we've done that in the past. Those of you who lived in Atlanta for a long time, there was a terrible event, tragedy, Katherine Johnson case in the 2000s, where several APD officers lied on an affidavit to get a warrant and resulted in a shootout and tragically killing Katherine Johnson. Our office prosecuted those officers. We got a guilty plea out of them, and they went to prison. At the same time, we were able to do that because the Department of Justice, particularly the U.S. Attorney's Office here, we always take the neutral view on these things. And even though we work closely with the police officer, we hold them to the law just like everyone else. And part of that is our community outreach program. And you mentioned one of them. Project Safe Neighborhoods is a flagship program for the department, where we try to make our community safer by prosecuting the violent criminals, but at the same time working with our communities to make sure that people who are returning from imprisonment are not put in an environment that's got them into trouble in the first place. And so I'm happy to note that we've worked very closely with our partners, including Department of Corrections and also our offender alumni. And we launched a credible messenger initiative where we pair up as a mentor-mentee relationship folks who came out of a prison for violent crime, and they made that transition to be a very successful and productive citizen. We use our grant monies to fund their programs, and we select and provide wraparound services for people coming out of the prison system. We have a very good relationship with the Metro Atlanta Reentry Center, where we go in for 6 months with these individuals coming out to work on things, not just things like stay out of trouble, but we're talking about life skills. We help them get jobs. We help them get a place to live, and those things are the biggest hurdles for them returning to becoming a productive citizen without committing recidivating. And so we focus on that, and our program has been showing some early promise, and I'm very optimistic it'll do real well. We've connected our cohorts, 92% success rate on family reunification, and which is another key statistically and research proven that it's going to help them go through. I figure that the Department of Justice going forward, in light of the recent events, we're going to probably play a larger and outsized role in helping to rebuild that trust between the public and the police. But we also try to look at it in a bigger space in terms of restoring public's confidence in the operation of businesses, operation of the government for the public. And you see that we do that mainly through prosecuting aggressively public corruption cases.
And on a different subject, we've also seen increased rates of COVID-19 infections. And our president, Angela Yu, has written about the increased incidence of crimes targeting Asian Americans, especially Chinese Americans, because of the COVID-19 and the scapegoating associated with that. What role, if any, does your office play in dealing with potential crimes targeting Asian Americans, and in particular Chinese Americans, as a result of the pandemic? And after you're done answering, I'll turn it over to Timothy.
Sure. Well, I want to note that it's very unfortunate that these things are happening, but there's a difference between a hate crime and a hate incident. I want to let everybody know that we investigate every hate incident that we become aware of in our district. As a matter of fact, FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office review every single incident. FBI actually tries to investigate every single incident, because what's happening is you'll have a hate incident that, when you trace it back, has organizational roots, right? So you will have, it used to be that the KKK or people who are outright racist were doing some stupid things and overt things like that. But now, in the advent of internet and technology, has allowed people to go underground. And so we rely on our investigative space and also our intelligence space to try to identify and keep track of them. A lot of times a hate incident is not prosecutable, but certainly we just want to make sure and disrupt and prevent people from acting out based on those type of views. And I can tell you right now that our domestic terrorism program, along with the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force, reviews every one of these incidents. And then we keep track of folks who we know are that are members of certain groups that promote hate or prejudicial views. And a lot of it you won't see in the public because, like I said, you don't see a hate crime. That's a legal threshold, but hate incidents are being tracked. And I want you to know that, that we are on top of those type of incidents and tracing back who's responsible for those things.
Thank you, Timothy.
Thanks, Rodney. Yeah, BJay, we're over time a little bit, but I think this is an interesting topic, and we're so fortunate to have you to talk with us during these trying times, I'll call them. And so I want to take a few more minutes, if you're available, to delve a little deeper into what we're seeing in the news and what we've seen recently with, as Rodney called it, the erosion of trust. But I would say in some circles, it's certainly going beyond an erosion of trust. It's we have a lot of calls for defunding of police departments. And I know there's a lot of meaning that people attach to that, all the way from let's scale back the funding to no, really, let's not have police, right? If you read national discussions such as New York Times, people are giving very serious thought to that question. There are also people who are expanding that thought of defunding police to the criminal justice system overall, which of course you are an integral part of, and people have expressed a complete, some people, a complete lack of confidence, or even to go so far as to say that it was broken from the start. I have no doubt that these events, which have caused us to think so deeply about these issues, have caused you and your office to think very deeply about it. Can you just share some of those thoughts and maybe some actions that you and your office are thinking about taking to react to these public sentiments?
Well, the first thing is I'm not in the policy role anymore, and I'm a member of the executive branch. So the actions that the executive branch takes is usually a function of what's passed by Congress. And so as we have this public debate, that was the perfect time for everyone to engage in whichever way you think is a better policy. I don't have a public opinion on which way I support, but I could tell you right now, from our perspective, prosecutorial discretion is a powerful thing. And we try to, at least I do, and I think it's true for all the AUSAs in my office, we try to do a careful balance. We don't prosecute cases not just because we can, but we will make sure that it's fair. There's something that's necessary that we need to do. At the same time, even on the sentencing or result or resolution phase, I don't tell my prosecutors to go ahead and follow exact guidelines to A, B, and C. That's why I hire folks with good judgment. There's a sense justice and fairness is a collective thought. It's not something one person. So you want to make sure that people have discretion, at the same time a wider perspective on how to resolve cases. And so that's what we're doing internally. And we also are addressing things like having a discussion about what this means, particularly for us, my office family members who happens to be Black, what the recent events kind of impacts their work and their perception and perspective. We're having a town hall this week on that. And so we are looking internally on how we could be better. And that's the charge that I've given them. Now, in terms of kind of the defunding the police, and I tell you, we ask the police officers to do a lot of things. And it's not just merely enforcing the law anymore. There are counselors, there are psychologists, And same things kind of happening with our teachers. We ask them to do a lot of things under a tremendous amount of pressure, with sometimes not enough resources. But that's a policy decision I think people in Congress and also in the legislature really need to make. I just hope that they make the decision not based on what's really hot politically right now, but really have a deep dive and a conversation about how to make the system work better. Because I think we need police, we need rule of law, and law and order is very important to a civilized society. And as a result, we need to make sure that as a community and Asian Americans, you need to participate in that process and have your voice heard. If not, offer yourself for public service. And so, as far as I'm concerned, being an Asian American U.S. attorney gives me a little perspective, and also gives me credibility about at least a little bit understanding what some members of ethnic minority communities go through. And so having people with diverse backgrounds in powerful positions like the one I'm currently holding, I think is very important.
Thank you. And do you think, is it your opinion that this moment in time is different and will actually cause change? There's a lot of debate about that, right? I mean, we're all hurting and we're all traumatized, to use your point from earlier, even if it's not someone we know or someone that we have close contact with. I think as a society, this affects us all. And I think that, certainly it feels like there's momentum for change. What are your thoughts on that?
I think this is a bit different. I really do. The clash between kind of communities and police who police them have been going back decades. And if you kind of know our history of our country, the use of force and use of power has been the center of the movement of civil rights. And so this time, I think there is more of a momentum. I mean, unfortunately, these type of incidents where we have officer-involved shootings happen, unfortunately, a lot more frequently than we want to. And I don't know exactly what is really causing the increase in shooting. I think partly it has to do with the lack of respect for the law at times. And other times, I think it's the community trust in police have been broken. So, but this time it seems to me that there is a wider perception that change needs to occur. I don't know what that change will look like, but I think the momentum is there. And I think based on people that I talked to from the community side and also from the police side, I think everybody's on the same page that some changes are needed. And I know, as a matter of fact, there's some movement, at least on the legislative side, on both Congress and here. Internally, in the Department of Justice, we've already took steps to execute the executive order the president signed on police activity. And through our granting power, meaning that we have a lot of grants, the Department of Justice gives a lot of money to local state governments for their police and policing. And through that, I expect that the Attorney General is going to pass some regulations and some guidelines that are going to be prerequisites to make this community safer and policing safer, and also that the trust could be rebuilt between the police and the community members.
Thank you, BJay. We really appreciate you being here, and thank you for your powerful words and your fascinating insight. We are so proud as a community, as a bar association, of the work that you've done. We're so grateful for what you shared with us today. You're an inspiration to all of us. And I hope, as you challenged the audience, I hope that this program serves as a small call of action to the community. As you noted, there's so much need. There's need at many levels. GAPABA is doing its part, small as it is, in organizing several initiatives to fight social and racial injustice. We have a team organized to join the Georgia Justice Project, which I know you have been very involved in their mission to help people clear their criminal records through legal means, which allows them a second chance at life and allows them to be productive citizens. We're also in discussions with Georgia Appleseed Center and then several other state and local organizations with a focus on equal justice. So stay tuned. We'll be sending more information. And then for those who are thinking bigger, those who have feel a special calling to serve in government office, as BJay said, you should pursue those dreams. As U.S. Representative Judy Chu, who's the chair of the Congressional APA Caucus, noted, and this was very, very touching to me, she said, "It is so important for Asian American Pacific Islanders to be in office. If we are not in office, our rights can be overrun or taken away. We saw that with Japanese Americans with the internment camp experience and the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was the most discriminatory act in our nation's history. Asian Americans were not in government at that time." She's entirely right. You know, for all of you listening, we thank you for joining us. We as Asian Americans, we need you to take action. And not just as Asian Americans, we as Americans need you to take action. I think this country needs and deserves diverse leadership. Leadership like BJay, leadership like Justice Carla Wang McMillan, who we had the opportunity to talk to recently. We, as BJay said, the diversity of thought, of opinion, of policymaking, of enforcement of laws is absolutely critical. And it's not critical just for that community from which the diversity comes from. It's critical for all of us as one country. So we, again, thank you so much for joining us. BJay, thank you for your time and for your wisdom. We appreciate everyone's ongoing support of GAPABA and NAPABA. And until next time, take care and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye.